Hey friends, what up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Ches, Daf 8 of Masechta Yevamos. Let's see, what time is it? Wait, what? Is that what time it is? Yeah, I guess so. Alright, what am I going to tell you? Friends, today we continue talking about, how we learn out that all of these 15 erva situations are also even in the context of Yibum and what we would have thought, why we need Alel, what exactly are we learning from the Pasuk. So, sort of continuing that discussion. So, friends, without further ado, let's jump in. We're going to start on Daf Ches Amud Aleph, about 10 lines or so into the page. The last word on the page is V'i. It says V'i Bayis Ema. Or, if you want, I will say, in explanation of the verse by Achos Isha, by your wife's sister. So, of course, as a refresher, the same refresher we've had for like the past 5 days, that we have a verse that says that you're not allowed to sleep with your wife's sister. We also have a verse that says that you're supposed to do Yibum with your brother's wife, and we say that your brother's wife is allowed in the context of Yibum, but we say a Gezer Shava of Aleh. It says Yevamo Yavo Aleh, so it says Aleh in the context of Yibum, and it says Aleh in the context of do not sleep with your wife's sister. So therefore we say that you don't do Yibum with your wife's sister. Now, what we've been trying to figure out up until now is but the assumption was that if we didn't have that Gezer Shavit, so then I would assume that you would do Yibum with your wife's sister, and the question is, why? So we phrased it as Aseh Doche Lo Taseh, that the Aseh of Yibum would override the Lo Taseh of don't sleep with your wife's sister. And we gave all sorts of answers. We ended up yesterday by saying that it's actually maybe just a specific situation where the Reuven died before Shimon married his wife Rivka, who's Reuven's widow Sarah's sister, whatever it is. So now, V'iba Yisema says the Gemara, or if you want, I will explain the situation in the following way. Asya be'akesha mid Reb Yonah, that we learn out from the Hekish of Reb Yonah, the Reb Yonah that says Reb Yonah, the Itema Revuna Bed of Yeshua Makra, the pasuk says Ki kol asher yaisim mikol to'eva sa'ela v'nichrusu. That, let's go weiter. Hukshu kol arayus kulon le'eshesach. So all of the arayus are compared to eshesach, meaning, let's go back one line. So the pasuk says Ki kol asher yaisim mikol to'eva sa'ela v'nichrusu. That anybody who does any of these forbidden relationships will get kares. Keilu. In the context of forbidden relationships, we group all of the forbidden relationships together, and we say, Ki kol asher yaisim mikol to'eva sa'ela v'nichrusu, that all of them, that any of these arayis, any of these forbidden relationships, if you do them, so then you're going to get kares. So we kind of group together all of the forbidden relationships, and therefore, hukshu kol arayus kulun le'eshesach, and therefore we compare all of them to the wife of your brother, right? Meaning, we group all of the arayos together, and therefore, if in one erva, if by eshes ach, it's permitted in the context of Yibum, so therefore I would assume that all of the arayos are permitted in the context of Yibum. And therefore I would think that even your wife's sister would be permitted, and that is why we need Alea, the Gezer Shava of Alea, to say, no, that's not true. Your wife's sister is not permitted in the context of Yibum. So Hukshu kol arayus kulun le'eshesach ma eshesach sharia, av kol arayus nami sharia. So I would have thought to say that we compare that we group together all of the arayas, and therefore just like your brother's wife is permitted in the context of Yibum, so therefore all of the arayos would be permitted in the context of Yibum. Kasav Achmane Aleo. Therefore, the pasuk had to say the Gezer Shava of Aleo, to say that Take, you would not do Yibum with your wife's sister. Amalei Ravach midifti liravina. Now says Ravach midifti liravina michdei. Kol arayos ikal akoshinu leishesach vikal akoshinu lachos isha. So now Rav Achmi Difti asks Ravina, says, okay, so we got two things going on over here. We got your brother's wife. We got your brother's wife who is permitted in the context of Yibum. You got your wife's sister who's forbidden in the context of Yibum. And now you got all of these other 14 arayas. And we have, I guess, sort of like a decision to make. We have to kind of figure out, are we going to compare these arayas to Eishes Ach, to your brother's wife, and say that they're permitted in the context of Yibum just like your brother's wife? Or do we compare them to your wife's sister and say that they're forbidden in the context of Yibum? So now, I'm going to read that again. So Rav Achmi Difti says to Ravina Michdei, let's see, Kol arayis ikal akoshinu leishes ach, that all of the arayis, all of these other arayis that aren't your brother's wife or your wife's sister, so we can compare them to Eishes Ach, to your brother's wife, and say that they're permitted in the context of Yibum. V'ikal akoshinu lachos isha, or alternatively, we can compare them to your wife's sister and say that they're not allowed in the context of Yibum, just like your wife's sister is not allowed in the context of Yibum. My choz is the akshas la'achos isha, akshinu la'achos le'ishes ach, ho. So Rav Achmi Difti asked Ravina, how come we seem to be comparing all of the arayas to the sister of your wife to say that they're asur, right? As the Masechta starts off by saying that there are chamish esrei, right? Nashim poshus tzarosein. Did I get that right? Wow, we're already 8 daf into this Masechta. Chamish esrei nashim poshus tzarosein v'tzarosein v'nachlitzum v'nayibim, etc. So we're clearly comparing all of these other arayos to achos isha, to your wife's sister, to say that you would not do yibum. The question is why? Why not? Why not compare them alternatively to your brother's wife, who is permitted in the context of Yibum? And for the Gemara, 2 terutzim, 2 answers. So answer number 1. Well, all things equal, if, we have to decide, are we going to go leniently or are we going to go stringently? Well, we kind of have to go stringently, meaning all things equal. So we can't just be lenient in this case. We have to be concerned that maybe it's going to be a forbidden relationship, and that is why we have to go stringent and say that all of these arayos are going to be compared to your wife's sister, who is forbidden in the context of Yibum. Alternatively, if you want, I will say, that, well, when it comes to all of these other arayos, they're both 2 isure, right? Meaning, obviously, let's go back there for a second. That when you look at Eishes Ach, so Eishes Ach is only one sort of technical problem, which is the fact that Sarah, if we take Ruvain, Shimon, Sarah, Rivka, so if it's a situation of Eishes Ach, right, a classic situation of Yibum, so that is Ruvain dies, his wife Sarah now marries Shimon. So there's one issue there, which is that, well, Sarah was Shimon's brother Ruvain's wife. We say, okay, fine, in the context of Yibum, we waive that. Now, we also have the situation where Sarah and Rivka are sisters, and Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Reuven is married to Sarah. Shimon is married to Rivka. Reuven dies. So now we have 2 things going on, which is that, well, Sarah is both the wife of Shimon's brother Reuven, which is problem number 1, and problem number 2 is that she's also the sister of Shimon's wife Rivka. So there's 2 issues over there. And all of these other arayos are also going to have 2 issues, right? For example, daughter-in-law. So in a context of Yibum, it would only be Yibum if the daughter-in-law was also the wife of your brother, and it's also your daughter-in-law. So Ki'ilu, for example. So all of these other arayos, they're always going to be in addition to being your brother's wife, because that's how Yibum works. Your brother dies and you marry his wife. So any of these other arayos are going to be in addition to the fact that she's also your brother's wife, which is a problem. And therefore, they're all situations of two problems, two isurim, which is analogous to to achos isha, which is also two issues, as opposed to plainly eshes ach, your brother's wife, which is only one issue. Therefore, all of these other arayos we will be comparing to achos isha, which is two isurim, as opposed to eshes ach, which is only one. Friends, let's go weiter. Okay, fine. Okay, so according to that is how we explain why we need the Gzeir Shava, because if we didn't have the Gzeir Shava, I would have thought to say that, well, all of the arayos are compared to each other, they're all grouped together, and therefore if Eshes Ach is mutter, so then I might think that all of the other arayos are mutter as well. Therefore we need Alea to teach me that Achos Isha is Asr, and we compare all the other arayos to Achos Isha. Rava gets involved and he says, Erva lo tzricha kro. That actually, friends, we don't need the pasuk to teach me that the erva itself is going to be Asr. The ein esei dochelo saisa sheish bo karis, because the mitzvah's essay of Yevamo Yavo Alea will not be doche the lo saisa that is karis of sleeping with your wife's sister. So therefore, the whole question that we've been asking for the past few days of that we're learning out that your wife's sister is also in the context of Yibum, and that's because we have the Gzeir Shava of Alea, and why would I assume though that the default would be that you would do Yibum, and I say all sorts of things. The latest thing that we said was, well, I may have thought to compare Achos Isha to say that basically all the arayos are permitted, whatever it is. Says Rava, one second. It's obvious that Achos Isha is going to be forbidden. It's obvious that Yibum, the mitzvah's essay, Yevamo Yavo Alea, will not be doche the lo ta'aseh of don't sleep with your wife's sister. I don't need a pasuk to teach me, I don't need a Gzeir Shava, I don't need nothing. That is not going to be allowed. Because sleeping with your wife's sister is a mitzvah's lo ta'aseh that has a chiyuv karis associated with it, and therefore it's clear as day, says Rava, that the mitzvah's essay of Yevamo Yavo Alea will not be docha that lo ta'aseh of sleeping with your wife's sister. So let's read that again. Rava Omar erva gufa lo tzricha kra. Says Rava, look, the erva itself, the forbidden relationship itself, your wife's sister, lo tzricha kra, we don't need a pasuk for this. The ein essay doche lo saise sheyesh bo karis, because mitzvah's essay, the positive commandment of Yevamo Yavo Alea, will not override the mitzvah's lo saise of don't sleep with your wife's sister, because there's a chiyuv karis associated with that. Ki itzrich kra lemeisar sare. Period. Says Rava, this whole pasuk about Alea, to say that it's not allowed is not about your wife's sister. That's certainly not allowed. It's about her tzara. It's that if Ruvain was married to Sarah and Shimon was married to Rivka, and Sarah and Rivka are sisters, but Ruvain had two wives, so what we have to learn out is that just like Shimon would not do Yibum with Sarah because she's the sister of his wife Rivka, but also if there was a co-wife, there also would not be Yibum. And I need the pasuk to teach me that for the tzara, there would not be Yibum. So I need the pasuk to teach me that you do not do Yibum even with the tzara. And that's what we need Alea for, to teach me that you do not do Yibum with the co-wife. when she's married to somebody who's also to Shimon. Now, is that really true? That I do not need a pasuk to teach me that achos isha is osir? V'ha katani, but it's taught in a brisa. Ein li ela hi mishum tzarasa. So wait, where am I? Ve'eva lo tzricha kra v'ha katani ein li ela hi. If we go back to Gimel Amud Beis, if we go back to Daf Gimel Amud Beis, so we said, how do we know about this whole thing with these 15 women and their tzaras and stuff? So we said, well, the pasuk says that you're not allowed to sleep with your wife's sister. And then the Brisa said, now all I know is that your wife's sister is asur. How do I know even her tzara? So therefore it says litzror, so it even includes the tzara. But it says, right, ein li elohi. So the pasuk teaches me, all I know so far is that the pasuk teaches me that your wife's sister is asur. So doesn't that seem to be saying that that's what in fact the pasuk is teaching me, that your wife's sister is asur, i.e. we clearly do need a pasuk to teach me that your wife's sister is asur, and that additionally then, in addition to your wife's sister being asur, we then learn out about her tzara and her tzara's tzara. So mishum tzara asur. So the Gemara says, no, that brisa, when it mentions your wife's sister, it's really only taught there to say, right, ein li elohi, it's in order to really teach me about what I really need to know about, which is her tzara, that her tzara is also, her co-wife is also asur. V'akatani ein li elohein. But then the brisa continues and says, all I know is them, right, your wife's sister and her co-wife. I.e., again, the pasuk seems to be teaching that your wife's sister is asur. So the pasuk does seem to be teaching that. So mishum tzara saying. So again, also no, it's because of the tzaras. Okay, fine, very good, because we said it applies to the tzaras as well. Okay, fine. So that's Rava's opinion that we do not need a pasuk to teach me that about the erva itself. That we do not need a pasuk, because certainly it's not allowed. The mitzvah's essay of Yevamos Yavo Aleh is not going to override the mitzvah's losai say of don't sleep with your wife's sister, which has a chiyuv kares associated with it. That pasuk of Aleh says Rava is to teach me about the tzara, that the co-wife is not allowed as well. Tashma, come in here. Rebbe Omer says Rebbe. V'lakach v'lakcha v'yabim v'yibma. So we have a brisa in which Rebbe says, what does the pasuk say? The pasuk says, you have brothers who live together, one of them dies, he doesn't have any children, so his wife doesn't marry just any random other person, rather Yevamo Yavo Aleh, so rather they do Yibum, and it says that Shimon will take her as a wife, and he will do Yibum with her. Now says Rebbe in the Brisa, it could have said Vilokach Lo liisha v'yabem, I guess. But it says v'lakcha. It doesn't say v'yabem, it says v'yibma. So how come it says v'lakcha? How come it says v'yibma? Lesser tzaris v'arayis. So says Rebbe that it teaches that the tzaris, that the co-wives are not allowed in the right? Meaning v'lakcha, you'll take her, you'll take your brother's wife, but not any other co-wives that are not allowed, v'arayis, and also the arayis. That when you have a situation of one of these 15 arayis, so then they are not right. You don't do yibum, and also their tzaras you don't do yibum either. But, so the question is, that Rebbe seems to be saying, V'lakcha v'yabim v'yibma, lesser tzaras v'arayis, to say that the tzaras are asur, but also that the arayis themselves are also. So Rebbe seems to be saying that the pasuk is in fact teaching us that the arayos themselves are also, not like Rava says that we don't need to learn about the arayos because there it's a losa say that as a chiyuv kares. Rebbe seems to be saying lesser tsaras ve'arayos, that the co-wives but also the arayos themselves are also. So we see the pasuk is teaching us about the arayos themselves. So and for the Gemara ema lesser tsaras shel arayos. No, so say that it means that the pasuk is teaching us that the tsaras of the arayos are asur. That when you have a forbidden relationship, so then you're not going to do yibum, obviously. But the pasuk is teaching us that there are tsaras that the co-wives also would not do yibum. V'atrei kroi konosivle. So, but one second. If we say that it's talking about tsaras shel arayos, so it's basically talking about the tsaras, but the pasuk says two things: v'lakach v'lakcha, v'yabim v'yibma. It's teaching two things. If we say that it's only talking about the tsaras of the arayos, the co-wives in a situation of a forbidden relationship, that's only one thing, co-wives. But the pasuk says two things: v'lakach v'lakcha is one thing, v'yabim v'yibma is the second thing. So my lab, chad le'erva v'chad le'tzara. So that seems to be implying, like we initially understood Rebbe, which is, one is to say that the tsaris are not allowed, but the co-wives are not allowed, that they don't do yibum. But the other one is to say that the erva, that the forbidden relationship themselves, the pasuk is teaching me that it's not allowed. So lo, not true. Idi v'idi litzara. No, they are both talking about the co-wife. Now listen up, friends. You ready? Chad lemeisar tzara b'makom mitzvah. One of them is coming to say that in the context of yibum, you do not do yibum with the co-wife of a forbidden relationship. But v'chad, the other one, lemishrei tzara shelo b'makom mitzvah. It's to permit a tzara, a co-wife, if it's not in the context of yibum. So meaning, if let's say, going back to like the first case that we had in the Mishnah, that if Ruvain is married to Shimon's daughter, let's say, so we say that Shimon, of course, is not going to do yibum with his daughter, but also any co-wives would not do yibum. But what if Shimon's daughter was not married to his brother Ruvain? What if Shimon's daughter was married to some random person, and that random person had more than one wife, so she was a co-wife, and then that co-wife gets divorced or whatever? So in that case, Shimon would be allowed to marry the co-wife. The co-wife, right, what we're saying is that the co-wife is only usher in the context of yibum. We say that if there's an erva, if there's a forbidden relationship, so yibum is completely called off for that forbidden relationship and for any co-wife. However, outside of the context of yibum, so then the co-wife is allowed. Right? You have a situation of a forbidden relationship, but any co-wife of that forbidden relationship would be permitted. So that's what we're learning out from Vilakha, V'yibma. One of them is to say that, yes, you take her as a, right, in the context of Yibum, i.e. your brother's wife, to the exclusion of any tsaros of arayos. And the second one, V'yibma, is coming to actually teach me that in the context of, if it's outside of the context of Yibum, so then the co-wife would actually be allowed. My time, how do we see this from the pasuk? V'yabem v'yibma. So when it says, right, it could have said v'yabem and you do yibum, but it says v'yibma, that you do yibum with her. B'makom yibum hu de asira tzara, that in the context of yibum is where the tzara is not allowed. Shelo b'makom yibum sharia tzara, right? That it's saying that you take her to the exclusion of the tzara, and it says v'yibma, that when we say that you do not marry the co-wife, that is in the context of yibum. However, outside of the context of yibum, the co-wife would be okay, right? So if Shimon's daughter is married to some random guy, and there she's a co-wife, so obviously, so whatever, so she's a co-wife, so then theoretically, if that co-wife ends up getting divorced, Shimon would theoretically be able to marry that co-wife. So that is what we're learning out from Okay, so therefore we had initially thought to say that according to Rebbe, it's to make Asr, the Tzara, and the Erva, which would be a Kasha and Rave, who says that we don't need a Pasuk for the Erva itself, but Rebbe seems to be saying that we are using a Pasuk for the Erva itself, but then we ended up saying that no, it's just talking about the Tzaras, and we're learning out two things. That in the context of Yibum, the Tzara is Asr, the co-wife is Asr, but outside of the context of Yibum, so then the co-wife of a forbidden relationship, the co-wife is actually allowed. Amar Ravashi, it says Ravashi Masnisa Namideka, that we can also infer this from the Mishnah, from our Mishnah, that I don't actually need to teach that the arayos themselves are asur, that are obviously they're asur. Dikatani chomish esri noshim potris tsarosei. Because what does the Mishnah say? That there are 15 arayos that potris tsarosei, that their tsaras, that their co-wives are also potter from Yibum. It doesn't say vilu pturis ufotris lo katani. It doesn't say that there are 15 arayos that they themselves are potter and also their co-wives are potter. No, it seems to be taken for granted that they themselves are potter. Or it goes straight to saying chomish esri noshim potris tsarosei. It goes straight to the tsaras, to the co-wives, to say that the co-wives don't need to do Yibum. But these 15 arayos, obviously they don't have to do Yibum. We don't even, it goes without saying. Shma mina. Fine, so we see that. Umay shna erva de lo tzricha kra. Now, frek the Gemara 1 second. So how come I don't need a pasuk to teach me that these arayas, that these forbidden relationships, for example, your wife's sister, how come I don't need a pasuk to teach me that that's forbidden in the context of Yibum? Well, because mitzvahs eseh v'yevamos yavo aleh will not override the mitzvahs lo ta'aseh, that you're not allowed to sleep with your wife's sister. And that's a lo ta'aseh, that is a chiyuv kares. If you do it, you have a chiyuv kares. So therefore I don't need a pasuk to teach me that you wouldn't do Yibum in that context. Obviously you wouldn't do Yibum. We're talking about a law that is a chiyuv kares. But friends, you ready for this question? The same pasuk that tells me, no, let's flip back to Daf Gimel Mid Beis for a second. What does the pasuk say? I don't know. Where are we? Dude, where in the world is? Oh, there it is. That don't marry your wife's sister, litzror. And we said that litzror is teaching us the tzara, the co-wife. And if we're saying that your wife's sister is allowed that as a chiyuv kares, well, the same pasuk talks about the co-wife oichit, talks about the co-wife as well. So therefore, if we're saying that I don't need a pasuk to teach me that I don't do Yibum with my wife's sister because it's allowed that as a chiyuv kares, well, guess what? Her co-wife as well is in the same pasuk. So make the same argument that I don't need a pasuk to teach me that Yibum is exempted for the co-wife because it's a law that is a chiyuv kares. So says, let me just make sure I didn't skip. I don't think I did. So says Rav Acha bar Bevai Mar Ravina. He says to Ravina, Hachi ka'amar mishmei Rava. This is what they say in the name of Rava. Tzara nami lo itztrich kra. So says Rava, you're right. That by tzara also I don't need the pasuk. That in the context of Yibum, I do not need a pasuk to teach me that the co-wife is aser. Ki itztrich kra, what we need the pasuk to teach me, what the Gzer Shavav Alea is coming to teach me, is limishrei tzara shelo bimkom mitzvah, is to teach me that a tzara outside of the context of Yibum is permitted. That Keilu, we have the pasuk says alea by Yibum, and the pasuk says alea by your wife's sister, that also in that pasuk, it also says the tzara. And what we learn out from the Gzeira Shava is that your wife's sister's co-wife is only asur in the context of Yibum, because we have the Gzeira Shava. It says Aleo by Yibum and Aleo by this pasuk of your wife's sister that also mentions the tzara, the co-wife. And we're saying what it's teaching is that Enochinami, I don't need it to teach me that it is the co-wife is also is basically pater from Yibum. But the chiddush is that we limit that to Yibum, but outside of Yibum, right? If if your wife's sister was married to some random guy, well then her co-wife would be permitted. My taima hakam amrkra aleha bimkom aleha huda asira, that the pasuk says aleha by Yevamos. It says aleha that it says aleha in the context of your wife's sister, and therefore in the context of aleha of Yibum, right? Therefore in the context of Yibum, so bimkom aleha huda asira, that is where the co-wife is also shalom bimkom aleha, but outside of the context of Yibum, sharia, the co-wife would be permitted. Okay, fine. That sounds very good to me. So now, Frekti Gemara, Amrle Ram Barchama LeRava Ua. So now Ram Barchama says to Rav, Ema erva gufa shalobim kol mitzvah tishrei. So Ram Barchama asks Rav, he says, wait, but let's say that the erva herself, right? Let's say your wife's sister herself is only asur in the context of Yibum, but outside of the context of Yibum, she would be permitted. So V'lav Kavachomeru, so Rav responds and says, what? That's preposterous. Bimkom mitzvah asira, if we're saying that in the context of a mitzvah, right, in the context of Yibum, where there's an actual mitzvah to be done, of Yevamo Yavo Aleh, we're saying that your wife's sister is forbidden. Shalom bimkom mitzvah, in a place where there's no mitzvah, where there's no reason, there's no compelling argument to argue and say that she should be permitted. Sharia, we're going to say that it's okay outside of the context of a mitzvah. If even in the context of Yibum, where we sort of have a compelling reason to say, well, so that we could do the mitzvah of Yibum, she should be permitted, and yet we say it's a forbidden relationship. Certainly outside of the context of Yibum, where there's no mitzvah, it's going to be forbidden. So Amrle Tzar Tochiach. To which Ram Barchama says, wait, but Enochinami, that sounds like a good argument, but it doesn't hold up, because if we look at the tzara, if we look at the co-wife, the bimkom mitzvah asira, that we're saying that she wouldn't do Yibum, and yet v'shelo bimkom mitzvah sharia, we're saying outside of the context of Yibum, the co-wife would be permitted. So Amar Lei, so Rava responds and he says, Alecha Amar Kra, yeah, but the pasuk says in the context of your wife's sister, B'chayel, right? The pasuk says, V'isha lechosa, right? Your wife and her sister, Lo sikach litzor legalos ervaso alea B'chayel. You cannot be with her B'chayel in her life. Kol she B'chayel, as long as she's alive, you would be unable to be with her, whether it's in the context of Yibum, whether it's outside of the context of Yibum. But one second, don't tell me that B'chayel is coming to teach me that my wife's sister is also, whether it's in the context of Yibum, whether it's outside of the context of Yibum. B'chayel is coming to say that when she's alive, you're not allowed to do, when she's alive, your wife's, as long as your wife is alive, so then her sister is also. But after, if your wife dies, so then the sister becomes permitted. So the mutila achar misa. So that's what we learn from B'chayel, that you can't be with your wife's sister as long as your wife is alive. But if your wife dies, so then the sister is permitted. So ahi mivisha lachosa nafka. No, that is learnt out from a wife and her sister you cannot be with, i.e. implying at the same time. But if your wife dies, then it would be permitted. But But if we only had the pasuk that says that you cannot be with your wife and her sister, well, then I might think, well, but if I divorce my wife, then I can be with her sister. But that's not true. Tamlomi b'chayel. That's why it says in our pasuk b'chayel, in her. Well, it's the same pasuk, right? That's why the pasuk says b'chayel, in her life. Kol she b'chayel afagavdin is gar shelo. That no, as long as your wife is alive, even if you divorce her and she's no longer your wife, as long as she's alive, your sister, her sister is also to you. But we learn out from Bichayel that if your wife dies, then the sister is permitted. So that's what we learn out from Bichayel, that your wife's sister is permitted if your wife dies. So then back to our question. Maybe I'll argue that just like the co-wife, also your wife's sister is forbidden in the context of Yibum, but permitted outside of the context of Yibum. So, Ella Amar Rav Huna bar Tachlifa Mishmei de Rava Trei Kroi Ksive. So says Rav Huna bar Tachlifa in the name of Rava, look, the pasuk has like two parts to it. Ksiv Isha lachosa lo sikach litzor. So the first part of the pasuk says that do not be with your wife's sister as well as her co-wife. So we see that it's talking about your wife's sister and her co-wife. Uchsiv legalas ervasa, and it says to reveal her, I think it's nakedness or whatever, erva, forbiddenness. Dechada mashma, that implies one. So meaning the pasuk seems to be referring at the beginning to to something that involves two people, right? It says isha lachosa lo sikach litzor, that seems to be talking about your wife's sister as well as the co-wife, so two people. But then it says legalas ervasa, which is singular, which is only talking about one person. So okay, tzad. So how could it be talking about two people and then one person? Well, the answer is bimkom mitzvah shtein asuris, that in the context of Yibum, it's talking about your wife's sister and her co-wife, i.e. that they're both asur in that context. Shelo bimkom mitzvah, but outside of the context of Yibum, he asura, your wife's sister is asur, vitzaras mutaris, but the tzara is permitted. Befekti gemara ipuchano. Wait, but maybe I'll switch it around and say bimkom mitzvah, he asura vitzaras mutaris. Maybe I'll say no. In the context, right, so the pasuk's talking about at the beginning two people and at the end one person. So I'll say that it's talking about one person in the context of Yibum. That in the context of Yibum, your wife's sister is asur, but the tzara is permitted. After all, it's the context of a mitzvah. Mishalobim kom mitzvah, but outside of the context of Yibum, shtei and asuris. Both your wife's sister as well as her co-wife are asuris. So imken lo yomar olel. But if that's the case, then we don't need the Gzeir Shava. That's obvious. Meaning, if we have a pasuk that says Isha lachosa lo sikach litzor, which is talking about two people, and then it says the Galas Servasa, which is talking about one person. So on my own, logically speaking, I can figure out, right, what would be the situation where both of them would be asur. They would both be asur outside of the context of a mitzvah, outside of Yibum. They're both asur. But in the context of a mitzvah, in the context of Yibum, where I can make the argument, look, we're doing a mitzvah here, so then I should be able to be with one of them, which we're assuming is the tzara, the co-wife. So that would be in the context of Yibum. So that would be the obvious answer. That in the context of Yibum, my wife's sister is asur, but her co-wife is mutter. Outside of the context of Yibum, they're both asur. I wouldn't need a Gzeir Shava to teach me that. I can just logically figure that out. If the pasuk's talking about two people and also one person, so the place where one of them is asur and one of them is mutter is in the context of Yibum. Outside the context of Yibum, both of them are asur. So therefore, the fact that we need a Gzeir Shava to explain this to me is because it's teaching us something that I would not have assumed on my own, i.e., that where they're both asur is in the context of Yibum, but outside of the context of Yibum, the co-wife is permitted. How do we know that the Gzeir Shava of Aleh is to say that they're both asur? Dilma le'atera. Maybe it's coming to say that they're both mutter in the context of Yibum. And this is what the pasuk is saying: Isha lachosa lo sikach litzor lo hivelo tzarasa. That you're not allowed to be with your wife's sister as well as her co-wife. Shalobim komaleo, outside of the context of Yibum, outside of the context of Yibum, you're not allowed to be with your wife's sister and her, right, or her co-wife. Avabim komaleo, but in the context of Yibum, shtein mutaros. I'll say that both your wife's sister and her co-wife are permitted, okay, in the context of Yibum. Imkin legale servoso dechada echi mishkachas. But if that's the case, then how do you understand legale servoso, which we said was singular? In what case is it only talking about one of them? What you're describing over here, Rav Ashi, is either both of them being asur or both of them being mutter. What's the case of ervoso? What's the case of only one of them, of singular? Even kol mitzvah shtei mutaros, you're arguing that in the context of a mitzvah, or the context of yibum, they're both permitted to do yibum. Ishalobim kol mitzvah shtei asuris. That if now we're talking about outside of the context of yibum, then you're arguing that both of them should be asur. Then where do we have the ervoso? Where do we have the singular situation where only one of them is asur but the other one is permitted? Says the Gemara Gufa that we said earlier. Rabbi Omer says, Rabbi v'lokach v'lokcha v'yavim v'yibma. Oh, that it could have said v'lokach singular, but it says v'lokcha. Well, it could have said v'lokach, but it says v'lokcha, that you take her specifically. V'yavim v'yibma. Could have said v'yavim, but it says v'yibma. Okay, less or tzaras v'arayis. To which we said that it's to teach that the co-wives are asur and that the arayus are asur. Okay, we ended up saying that really it's just talking about just the co-wives. Miditzaris ksiva acha. Now, in fact, the Gemara, I don't see anywhere in the pasuk that it says anything about tzaras. It says v'lokach v'lokcha v'yavim v'yibma. What does this have to do with saying that tzaras are asur? Ve'od, and more so, tzaras militzor nafka. We learn out that the tzaras are asur, as we have said in the past, from litzror. That the Gemara itself said that litzror teaches that it's talking about the co-wives as well. So why is Rebbe coming and saying that we learn out that the tzaras are asur from v'lokach v'lokcha v'yavim v'yibma? So answer the Gemara, litzror mapikle Rebbe lichd Reb Shimon. That Rebbe learns out litzror not to be talking about the tzaras, rather he learns it out like Reb Shimon learns it out. Rashi explains the case. It's talking about a situation where whatever you have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven's married to Sarah, Shimon's married to Rivka. Sarah and Rivka are sisters. Reuven and Shimon both die mamish at the same time, which means that right at the same time, Sarah and Rivka now are shy and have to do yibum with Levi. So it says Shimon in that case that they wouldn't do yibum. Okay, fine. So he learns that out from Litzror, that if they both became tsars at the same time, that they wouldn't do yibum. Fine, whatever it is. So Rebbe learns out from Litzror like Shimon does, i.e., not to say that the co-wife is asur, but specifically, in a specific other situation where you have two sisters who now become, yibum candidates, that they don't do yibum. Fine. So therefore, okay, but tsar acha ksiv, but where, or heicha ksiva. Where is Sarah written over here? Fine, okay, so Litzror isn't teaching us Sarah, but where do you see in V'lokach v'lokcha v'yavim v'yibma, where do you see anything about a Tzara, about a co-wife? So Achi Kamar. This is how to understand it. Imkein lemakra v'lokach, my v'lokcha. How the pasuk could have said v'lokach, right? Why does it say v'lokcha, that it'll take her? So kol heicha deika trei likuchen. Well, the answer is wherever there is the possibility of marrying either wife, the ibai nosiv high, v'ibai nosiv high, sharia. Then you do yibum. Let's go weiter for a second. V'ilo tavayu asiron. But if not, then both of them are asur. Meaning, if you have a situation where Reuven was married to two wives, not right, they're not related to Shimon in any way. You have Reuven and his brother Shimon. Reuven has two wives. Reuven dies, and Shimon can do yibum with either one of them. So in that case, where Shimon is able to do yibum with either one of them, so then vilakha, right? So then you have yibum, right? So vilakha, meaning if he wants to take her, he could take her. If he wants to take her, he could take her. As long as either wife is a possible candidate for yibum, so then yibum applies. But if even one of them, right, you would say v'lakha, that if you try to do yibum with her, we would say, no, you cannot do yibum with her because she's an erva. So then you don't do any yibum at all, not with her, not with the co-wife. So that's how we learn out from V'lakcha. Right? As long as you can, have the possibility of doing yibum with either wife, so then yibum applies. But if you wouldn't be able to do yibum with either wife, so then, right, because one of them is an erva, so then also the co-wife is aser, and that is how we learn out that the tzara is aser from V'lakach V'lakcha. Now V'yibma, and then what do we learn out from V'yibma? That bimkom yibum huda asira, that the co-wife is only aser in the context of yibum huda asira tzara shelo bimkom yibum, but outside of the context of yibum sharia tzara, outside of the context of yibum, the tzara is permitted. Fine. But the co-wife is permitted. V'rabbanan, the rabbis who argue on Rebbe and do not learn out tzara from V'lakach V'lakcha V'yabim V'yibma, Hai V'lakcha Ma'avdile, what do they do with V'lakcha? So Mibaylelich Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, they need it like Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, the Amr Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, V'lakcha, that he takes her, that it's like likuchen, that they're like mamish married, that once already, right, that once Shimon marries Sarah, right, Reuven was married to Sarah, Reuven died, Shimon now marries Sarah. So once they are together through Yibum, it's like they're married. And if they want to break it off, she now needs a get. And then, just like if somebody was married to a woman and they got divorced, they can get remarried again. Same thing here. That if Shimon divorces Sarah, and then they decide that they want to get remarried, they can. We don't say that once you break off the Yibum, then she just becomes Eish Esach. And it's Aser. No, not true. Once they're married, they're basically like a regular married couple. If they get divorced, they get divorced. They can always get remarried if they want to. That's that. V'yibma, what do we learn out from V'yibma? Al Korcha, even if it is against her will. Okay? If there was Yibum against her will, then it still counts as Yibum, and they're a couple. V'Rebbe, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, Mili'isha Nafka, and Rebbe learns out Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina's halachas that they are like a husband and wife once they do Yibum from Le'isha, that she will be from a wife. Nafka, that's where he learns out Al Korcha. And how does he learn out that even if Yibum happens against her will, it still counts as Yibum? Yevamos Yavo Aleh Nafka. He learns it out from Yevamos Yavo Aleh, that he will, be with her, and that and once that happens, they are together. Friends, that was Daf Ches of Masechta Yevamos, another powerful daf here in Masechta Yevamos. The daf started out with another option of, kind of two options, but the first option that the Gemara mentioned for why we need Aleha to teach me that we do not do Yibum with your wife's sister, because otherwise I would assume that, the pasuk groups all of the arayas together, and I might think that, okay, if one of them is permitted in the context of Yibum, so then all of them should be permitted in the context of Yibum. Therefore, I need Aleha to teach me, no, that do not do Yibum with your wife's sister. And then once we learn that out, so then we learn out all the other arayos to be like your wife's sister, because it's more similar. We gave two reasons. One of them is because, if we can either compare it to your brother's wife to say that it's mutter, or your wife's sister to say that it's aser, and all things equal, we have to be concerned that maybe it's not allowed, and be stringent to say that you don't do Yibum in those cases like your wife's sister. And the other way to understand is that, your wife's sister is two Isurim, right? The fact that it was your brother's wife and the fact that it's your wife's sister. And all the other rows are also two Isurim, as opposed to when it's simply your brother's wife, so that's only one Isur, so therefore it makes more sense for us to compare it to your wife's sister rather than to your brother's wife. Then we had the opinion of Raveh, which is that actually we do not need a pasuk to teach me that your wife's sister is not allowed in the context of Yibum, because it's a lo saseh that has a chiyuv kares associated with it, and obviously Yibum will not override it, and that is that. What we need the Gzera Shavar for is to teach me about the tzara, about the co-wife, to teach me that in the context of Yibum, the co-wife is not allowed. However, outside of the context of Yibum, the co-wife would be allowed. So if you have a forbidden relationship, that's obviously not allowed, but any co-wife of that relationship would be permitted. Okay, and then we had kind of discussions back and forth exactly how to learn that and what the different possibilities could be, but that was kind of like the big teaching there. which is that the co-wife in the context of Yibum is not allowed, but outside the context of Yibum, the co-wife would be allowed. We learned an interesting halacha at the end, which is that once they do Yibum, so then they're essentially like a regular married couple, and if they want to break it off, they do that they need to get, and then if they want to get remarried, they can, just like a regular divorced couple can. Friends, that was Daf Ches of Masechta Yevamos, another powerful daf over here. Peace.